Summer of Love, Britain is absolutely at the centre of the world culturally. You know, music, the arts, fashion. They've just won the World Cup, England have. Scotland, a high watermark of Celtic winning the European Cup. Everything is happening in England. The eyeballs on this. You became super famous super quickly. In the modern context of the world now, where fame is a very different thing and is spread through social media, these people were almost overnight, couldn't walk down the street.
He also gets involved in the other great aspect of modern life in the mid-60s. You had Coronation Street, and on BBC One, you had a series called United! Exclamation mark.
So this all started with Jimmy Hill. Before that, this didn't exist, where you would bring in people, football people, of different persuasions to come in and talk about a football match. Hello and welcome to If You Know Your History with me, Jonny Owen, and my good friend...
I'm Mark Webster. Hello there, Jonny.
And we are now on to the second episode, we'll call it, of our epic on Jimmy Hill.
That's right, Mr. Modern Football, we called him. And when you get stuck into the life and times of Jimmy Hill, there is no doubt about it. Finger in every conceivable pie that is the game that we know now.
It's an epic story, Mark. And we've kind of sort of divided them up. That one was on the pitch. This was on the screen.
Yes.
Because he became omnipresent, I think the saying is, on British television screens from sort of the early 70s. And, he was famous before that, but now he sort of hits that hyperdrive where he is one of the most famous people in the country.
You're right. He's presenting himself now as a media personality, but he takes his expertise and again, changes football as we know it. If I may, can I ask the question that gets answered at half-time?
You can, but just before, I'm going to have the instruction I've had from the boys, our Tom and John, that you can get if you...
Yes, you can.
You can get it if you know your history.
Want it.
You can get it if you know your history on all available platforms. You know the drill. Spotify, who featured us on their page.
They did, didn't they? We were up there. Our boy was up there large. You nicknamed him. What do you call him?
Alfonso something.
I like him.
Yeah. No, Alfred, because we went with an ordinary name. Theodore, Alfonso.
You give him
a mixture of cultures and sort of things. Anyway.
I like it when he dribbles.
yeah, exactly. That's AI, isn't it? All that AI. They'll be doing this podcast as AI. They'll take a few of these and then they'll just sort of chuck us in a machine. And
to be honest with you, I'm not even here.
Anyway, you know the drill, how to get us. But the question, what's the question?
The question is, a name that's going to crop up in a moment's time, is that Bob McNabb, who I remember as an Arsenal footballer, crucial in the development of television football.
Yeah.
But he also made an appearance in a legendary sitcom, Which One?
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. So on to Jimmy Hill now. Okay, so 1967, bombshell amongst bombshells. After a stellar few years at Coventry City, he quits.
Yeah.
He quits as manager, basically. He still very much stays involved with Coventry City right to the end of his days almost, and much loved there, as we've said. But he leaves football in an everyday capacity to go and work in the media.
Yes. He ultimately does, as you say, can't stop himself. He goes out. Saudi Arabia becomes a target. He's one of the first to look there.
Yeah.
America as well. He tries to get involved and develop football in that particular territory. But I think he was always going to be drawn to being a spokesperson and an innovator, wasn't he? Because that's all he did in football.
Yeah, he's always looking for new lands to conquer, as they say. That's just innate in him, I think.
Yes.
And, people now would go, I can't believe he'd leave, football, because obviously the money's in the game now. Being a manager, a successful manager at that, why would you leave all that to go and work in television as for whatever it is? We'll talk about his first job in television, which is fascinating in itself anyway. But this is nothing new. Me and Mark were talking about. Roy Keane's a great example of this, man.
Yeah.
He's become arguably the most famous pundit now in the country, Roy Keane. Developed this brilliant sort of personality and character. People love him. He's there on virals, his podcasts, he's all over television. He was a young, dynamic manager at one point, taking Sunderland up. He'd gone to Ipswich. He'd been assistant at Forest and Villa. He's kind of gone, no, I want to leave all that and go to work in the media. This happens quite a lot in football, doesn't it?
And it's weird that he did that, because when you think back about, say, for example, which of course is being highlighted, for a drama as we speak, the Roy Keane that is so bullshit in the international squad, where he's got a lot to say as a player, about the way that the team is being coached and managed. You think he's a shoo-in
Yeah.
To basically therefore have a career in the dugout, don't you?
Alan Hansen, the same. Alan Hansen, for a long time, one of the most famous pundits in Match of the Day history, and we'll be talking a lot about Match of the Day later on in this podcast, but he's always very happy going, look, I'm going to sit on a settee or on a chair and I'm going to talk about the game and dissect it, but I ain't interested in all the nonsense that comes with being a manager, because that is a highly pressurised job. Jimmy Hill probably had a bit of that. You know, you go into football, you know, there's only one, say, Sir Alex Ferguson, where you're going to constantly win. There's pretty much in every managerial career, you know, the Wenger years at the end, there's going to be a natural decline and a time where an icon of a club, fans start to, because that's the nature of the beast, Mark, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's, now that you put it like that, I just wonder if he was smart enough to himself that he said, I've done this for 6 years.
Yeah.
This is good as it's going to get.
I agree with that.
I've peaked, and my peak isn't good enough for what I think I am in terms as a person.
Yeah.
Because obviously the thing about Jimmy Hill was he had complete and utter confidence in himself.
Yes.
And perhaps that confidence was somewhat dented by the fact he didn't exactly take off at Coventry.
Well, he took them up. He took them up.
Yes,
but I think I get
not
what
held
you're
in those kind of esteem.
What I think you've got a point is, was he going to get an offer of a really big club coming for him?
Exactly. Where's the next big step?
Yes.
And that next big step possibly wasn't there.
I mean, like Busby's at United at this point. Yeah, Shankly's at Liverpool. You know, Bill Nix at Spurs. It's a good
and
point.
He's not spoken of in those terms, is he?
Where do you go after, if you're Coventry City and you've taken him into the top flight, and you know what's the next step? He's obviously gone. The next step for me is to go into television. I mean, you know, we were speaking about it just now to John, the guy who looks after us here, the producer. By the late 60s, pretty much most houses have got a television. Now, television is becoming, you know, it's really infiltrated into our lives. There's the extra channel on BBC Two. That's sort of just coming.
Crazy.
You know, yeah. ITV has taken off like a rocket, and people love it. You know, so there's the world of television is now permeated into all aspects of British life. Jimmy's clocked it, and he's also clocked it in 1964, the same time as Top of the Pops is launched. Match of the Day launched.
Match of the Day is coming as well, and in between that period of time and the fact that he goes on to become this master manipulator of football, he also gets involved in the other great aspect of modern life in the mid-60s. You had Coronation Street, and on BBC One, you had a series called United! !
Football's really interesting in this sense, Mark, right? Because if you're sitting there in 1967, right? 1967, okay? It's the summer of love. Britain is absolutely at the centre of the world culturally. You know, music, the arts, fashion. They've just won the World Cup, England have. Scotland, a high watermark of Celtic winning the European Cup. Man United are going to win. Everything is happening in England and Britain.
Yes.
Everything, okay? If you were sitting there as a TV executive and you said, right, we're going to do a soap about a football team, you would think that is an absolute shoe-in to be a success, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. Guess what?
It's a flop. And I think this has been pretty much the case mostly ever since. Some wonderful ideas, you know, there's going to be a football show, there's going to be this football comedy, there's going to be... Doesn't work.
No.
It keeps coming back to the same thing. Boxing, tick, always works.
Yes.
Football, really hard to recreate. Now, I know we've had sort of... what was the... There was a
Dream Team.
Dream Team.
See, John Salthouse, a good friend, and the Dream Team is a story in itself, is extraordinarily successful because it's smart enough to... With John Salthouse, a man who came out of football, so he knows the dynamic of football itself, but he also is an actor, so he knows what basically is compelling drama. And he manages to combine that two worlds.
Footballers' Wives, which looks more at the aspect. And now you've got Ted Lasso. Which is a very much sort of a slightly Americanized view of what...
But they don't get the ball out too often, which is probably common sense.
I mean, I'm just, you know, they ain't going to have that cultural impact that, you know, that we would have expected to have. You would think that a long-running soap about a football team would be one of the most watched shows on, but it's just never quite worked.
Doesn't take off. We had, and I always kind of thought this, perhaps this is the precursor, you had This Sporting Life, which is obviously Richard, and so
fabulous film.
One of the... arguably one of the great kitchen sink dramas of that period in which the working class life...
His favourite role ever.
There you go.
Sums it up.
Rugby does quite well on the screen because you can have a lot of close-ups there, can't you? And there's not a lot of stuff going on. Basically, it's men holding, hugging and running.
It's a good show, actually,
and carrying. But, of course, so much of it is the domestic part of the story that makes it work so well.
Football's so hard. We keep coming back to this. It's so hard to recreate football, isn't it?
It does. It never looks right. And They had 147 episodes to have a go at it, though, John, because this was soap on that kind of, well, obviously Coronation Street level and EastEnders level of turning this stuff over.
Yes. What it is, guys, this is a 1967 soap series called United, and Jimmy Hill is brought in to become the advisor.
He's the technical advisor, I'm going to assume, on the football.
Yeah.
I bet he had plenty to say about the other stuff, but let's just give him his authentic role is Jim's the man who's make the football look real.
Yes. And there's a fictional football team called Brentwich United, okay? And the criticisms were, right, they was slightly too soft for men and not soft enough for women, right?
So like the Three Bears beds.
And not realistic enough. But this is my favourite bit. But Wolverhampton Wanderers put in an official complaint to say that it was too much like them. So it was obviously
so
it was obviously doing something right.
Soft or not soft enough.
So it was obviously doing something right. But this is the bit that drives me mad. And listen, you can't blame the BBC for this, but oh my word. They did this thing, the BBC, in the mid-60s. And I get it, because tape was so expensive and film was so expensive and all that. Oh,
don't say it out loud, John.
They wiped the series. They wiped it.
I would watch that to death now, wouldn't you?
That would be...
Not necessarily for the right reasons, but I would watch it to death.
A 1967 series with Jimmy Hill as the advisor, based on Wolverhampton Wanderers, or so they think, with a name after Manchester United, and they wiped it. And at the same time, they wiped tapes of the Beatles, of Hancock, of episodes of Steptoe and Son, dramas with people like Burton in. I mean, like, you just go, oh... I mean, that poor guy who was like, wipe that. Dave, give that a wipe, will you?
Exactly.
What is it? Oh, it's the Beatles' third appearance on British Town. Oh, that series United. Get rid of that as well.
That's right. We can stick something over the top of that people really want to watch. It's an amazing setup as well. It was kind of made. It was built like a football season as well. It was made in between Doctor Who's by the same people who's made Doctor Who, which also gets wiped. Tons of.
But there's an actor in it called Derek Sherwin. Right, yeah. Who plays, I love this, a fiery Welsh forward.
Of course he does.
But he's not even Welsh. So they've obviously had the classic sort of act, hello, how are you doing? So they had that accent,
Don't
right?
sound that fiery, John.
Yeah, so he comes in there. But he later becomes an actor, writer, producer on Doctor Who, and is the man that casts John Pertwee, who, let's be famous, is the greatest Doctor Who ever. Okay. So the fiery Welsh forward for United, who's been advised by Jimmy Hill. So Jimmy Hill not only sort of helped the specials, but he's involved in Doctor Who.
He invents the Whoniverse. as we know it. I'm going to give him Wurzel Gummidge as well then in that case. I mean, while we're here, throwing around bouquets. David Lodge, who is always one of the funniest people alongside Peter Sellers. He was in Peter Sellers' gang. He plays the boss. The names are terrible. He plays the boss. Jerry Brayford. Of course, that's a manager's name. And one of the other cast members who's still knocking about, he was called Jimmy Stokes. And I mention him because he's still alive and kicking, and he tours and tells great stories about his career, is George Layton. Who of course, he was in Doctor in the House. Yes. He ended up in Minder. He's just done loads and loads of good comedy over the years, and he's still about. And he was Jimmy Stokes.
Jimmy Stokes.
Yes.
See, I mean, I'm agreeing. I would have watched this series to death. Even in the 80s as a kid, if somebody put it on VHS, that would have done really well. And now that would be right up there.
Exactly. Could have been done.
He leaves because, it doesn't take off commercially. They don't recommission it. And in 1968, he leaves to become the head of sport for London Weekend Television.
Yes.
Oh, kids.
Which is newly formed.
Oh, kids, if you're out there listening. Am I right? Is this the...
Very nice. With the L...
yes.
And with that, you get dum, dum, it's Thames. Dum, 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 dun, 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 dun.
Brings back some memories.
And LWT is where the logo forms in one snaky line.
And London is an upside down London Bridge or Tower Bridge?
That pops up. That might be the Thames one. LWT is the logo.
Oh, that's Thames, yeah.
That's the logo one.
Yes.
LWT.
Anyway,
it's fluid.
Yes, ITV used to be made up of lots of regions, like the BBC still tries to be, and you'd have your own unique region in each part of the country. So I was in HTV, which stood for Harlech Television.
Yes, it did.
And that obviously incorporated Wales and a little bit of the West Country. And the West Country hated the fact that they had a Welsh name called Harlech Television. So they had to abbreviate it to HTV instead.
So as not to upset people from the Bristol area?
Absolutely, because, if you're living on the borders, it's much more of a rivalry.
Provocative.
It's provocative. So, and Lord Harlech, who was obviously a patron a bit, but these ITV readers had an amazing history, because the Welsh one, which was born out of TWW, Telewelly Television, TWT, and it become HTB, money put into it by Stanley Baker and Richard Burton. And they used to turn up. When I worked there as a kid, right?
Yeah, that was one of your early jobs, wasn't it? Yeah.
I used to go into the archive, Mark. I spent hours, and I would pull tapes out, literally with things like Clint Eastwood in Cardiff studios, and I'd whack it in, and there would be Clint Eastwood who'd flown over from filming in Italy to do an interview in Cardiff, and I'm going, he's in Pontcanna Fields there, because he's mates with Burton, who's gone, I've just formed a television company. Do me a favour, Clint. Can you nip over and do it? Yeah, no problem. So you've got these Hollywood stars pull in favour. Interviews with Liz Taylor. Interviews with like world famous people in these regional television areas.
Is this the bit when your boss sticks his head round the door and says, Johnny, wipe those tapes, would you, with Clint Eastwood? And now all we've got is your word for it.
Mark, BBC and ITV, they live off these archives now. They charge like £9 million a second, as us filmmakers know.
It's a library.
It's a library. It's absolutely right what you're saying. It's a library.
Yeah.
And, you know, to think they've wiped them. But the reason why this is important, LWT is a great example of an innovative ITV, independent television region, that's looked at Jimmy Hill and gone, all right, see you.
Yeah.
You come in as head of sport. And boy, does that decision bear fruit for them.
It launches well. I mean, because I'm a big fan of, I'm the right age, by which I literally mean the fact I wouldn't be necessarily staying up all night for Match of the Day.
Yeah.
And then also, as a teenager, you're out on a Saturday night, the big match.
Yes.
And he's part of the big match setup. Because Brian Moore, I think, is one of the great frontmen and commentators of all time, and the big match now is rerun, and it's so popular.
Yeah.
You know, as you talk about that nostalgia, the whiff of nostalgia. They're redoing that now by showing old big matches
On ITV4?
Yeah,
you don't say. I watch every single one recorded. My missus goes to me, Johnny goes, what are all these things recorded here? And I'm like, big match, ITV4. I'll leave that one there, love. That's Leicester playing against Walsall in an FA Cup
It's an absolute
game.
classic from some point in
on
the
a
past.
very mucky-looking Filbert Street. Oh, look at those players.
When the team sheet goes across the top of the picture and wobbles as he's reading out the 11 that are about to entertain you for the next 15 minutes. But Jimmy Hill, of course, in those days, very smartly, they were using, he was being used in the expert role.
Yes.
And this becomes important because, to a great extent, at this stage, you haven't really had that context.
No.
You had your front man,
Yeah.
and Brian Moore's your front man, and Brian Moore's bringing the journalism.
Yeah.
But what we hadn't had is the ex-pro. And Jimmy Hill takes on this kind of ex-pro role, and he realises that there's a space in the market.
I mean, if you can ever have the chance to Google this, if there's one thing Google Jimmy Hill doing analysis, you would be astonished the way he talks about footballers. He will literally go, Mark Webster just needs to learn to calm down at this point, use his left foot a bit more, and there's a chance then he can progress in his career. We need a few more goals from midfield, and the lads possibly got a chance of an England call-up. It is amazing. Yeah. He's basically, tell him, it would be like Alan Shearer going, what this lad needs to start doing more is pulling the ball down, turning, and it's just not good enough what he's doing. He is analysing footballers in a way that in the modern context we could barely believe.
It's that kind of minutiae. It's too microscopic. And yet, of course, what he's doing, but he's learning on screen. You know, he's inventing this as he goes along.
People love it. And players get really annoyed about it or embrace it if he's good at them, but he becomes hugely powerful. And what he's learning, what he's done is what he's set up is what we now call the panel. The panel of players. So he's the first person, and there's a big moment again in football. The 1970 World Cup. I mean, this World Cup is the World Cup. It's in colour. It's got all the great players in the world, but what you've got is he brings personalities in to talk about the World Cup,
If I can at this stage, because it's the perfect launch pad for it. Is Barney Ronay 10 years ago wrote an extraordinarily good obit about Jimmy Hill, because it's not all bouquets. There's a few brickbats in there as well,
course,
because it's warts and all when it comes to Jimmy. And by 1970, says Barney, he was head of ITV Sport and engaged in single-handedly inventing the Punditry panel for the Mexico World Cup. Under his guidance, Malcolm Allison, Bob McNabb, Derek Dugan and Pat Crerand were transformed into a scowlingly brown-suited One Direction, taken by limousine from door to door, mobbed by female fans on shopping excursions, and even, in McNabb's case, deluged with hundreds of teenage marriage proposals. No knowledge of this. I was too young to get that context at the time.
Yeah.
I had no idea that superstar status was being created by this quirky, innovative new idea that may or may not have worked, but by jingo it did.
Well, I mean, millions of people watch these games, Mark.
Yeah.
Millions. Like I said, there's not the channels, there's not the thing. I mean, millions of people watch big internationals and World Cup finals now. But then, can you imagine? I mean, I grew up on stories of like World Cups being watched in 58 and 62 and 66 with, chairs all around the television, so
Yes.
people coming into, more and more people are getting televisions, as we said. So, but the eyeballs on this, you became super famous super quickly. In the modern context of the world now, where fame is a very different thing and it's spread through social media, these people were almost overnight, you couldn't walk down the street. Yeah. You couldn't walk down the street. That's how famous they were. And Jimmy Hill kind of invented this.
Well, he did. I mean, he road tested it himself.
Yeah.
I mean, again, just nipping back because I think we mentioned this before in one of the episodes, is he's the umpire for, so Brian Moore in a big match throws to the fact that Malcolm Allison had been talking about Alan Mullery.
Oh.
And basically just did a real hatchet job on Alan Mullery. So Brian Moore throws to the fact, well, last week Malcolm had this to say about Alan. So Alan's in the studio now to talk to Malcolm about it, and with Jimmy Hill in the middle, basically to stop and throwing punches, I think. And it is
an argument,
visceral,
a proper row.
Yeah.
I mean, this happened with Cloughton, the famous, and Don Revie.
Yeah.
In the modern context, that would be almost like Mourinho and Klopp having a row on television in front of each other, and everybody watching.
Well, you'll get 10 seconds sound, little soundbite now of a swear gets out or something.
All tidied up by
this was
PR
basically a preordained, choreographed ruck.
Yeah.
So it's amazing.
People loved it. I mean, and this set the president up. I mean, there's always these photographs pop up on social media of people going, look at the panel for the 82 World Cup. George Best, Brian Clough, Bobby Moore. And you just think, oh my God, they're all together. This comes back that when until the early 80s, they were going, and the second voice of Wimbledon was Fred Perry. And you go, well, Fred Perry was the second voice. Yeah. Fred Perry was the commentary voice on Wimbledon.
Yes.
So it almost feels like these people belong to sort of a weird stratosphere of fame. But Georgie Best sat with Brian Clough in a studio going, Spain in that game second half. Johan Cruyff in the 74 FA Cup final talking about Sunderland's defence and how brilliant they were. So this all started with Jimmy Hill. Before that, this didn't exist, where you would bring in people, football people, of different persuasions to come in and talk about a football match.
And giving ex-footballers and managers a new revenue stream.
Yes.
A new way to be able to top up what might not be the greatest bank account in the world.
And as we finish this first part of this episode, this circles back beautifully to our conversation about Roy Keane. What you see now with Roy Keane, and of course it's different ways of doing it through social media and Gary Neville, but this started with Jimmy Hill of giving people another chance of another career, another opportunity outside football, but analysing a game in the way. And when we come back in the second half, we're also going to talk about the fact that he probably invented modern podcasting.
That as well.
Join us. Oh, there it is.
I don't think we were even close.
But
now I've heard it.
Does
again,
that bring it all flooding back?
Oh, it does. Because of course that's where my football lived.
Yeah.
That's me more often than not eating my roast dinner that my mum's put in the oven with the gravy's gone crispy around the edge.
The smell of cabbage in the house.
Oh, lovely. Oh, I'm all over that. That's marvellous. And again, evocative. You mentioned earlier, and it's so crucial. 1970, Mexico becomes like the television launch pad. Funny enough, again, as a kid, I remember it's because they also had the Olympics in '68.
Yes,
and I think that's probably the first time us youngsters saw what the colour of things were.
Yeah, 70 especially. The green, the pitch, the yellow of the Brazil shirts, all that kind of stuff. The blue of Italy. It's really striking how much that sort of.
It may be why when we discuss this, I can't get past Brazil as the greatest football team ever because it's such a vivid image in my head of the
We didn't
of the
have many
people
argue against that when we both agreed on Brazil.
weren't pushing the way out too far, was we?
No, exactly. Yeah, it's like going, I think Muhammad Ali's the best boxer ever. You don't say.
That's right. Let's sit down and have a chat about that one, shall we?
Anyway, what's the answer to the question, Marco?
Right, okay, so I did ask. So I mentioned him there, Bob McNabb. Marriage proposals. I didn't know he was a real heartthrob, but I remember as an Arsenal player, and I also remember thinking, why has he turned up on this? in an episode from 1973 called The Football Match, Bob McNabb, in his Arsenal kit, was in the tea room on the buses.
On the buses.
Keeping the ball up.
Oh, they go.
In a crazy episode in which, no doubt, that what they're doing is they're putting a team together from the depot.
So the two main characters on the buses are
Reg.
And
Reg Varney is obviously the one. And there's
Jack.
Jack.
Right, no, so Jack's teeth are the influence for Austin Powers' teeth.
That would make perfect sense.
Myers, obviously, because he was meant to be a heartthrob in it, Mike Myers and the famous expression English mouth, where the Americans look at our teeth and say that, he made it almost an exact replica, and they became Austin Powers' teeth in Austin
Good
Powers.
Lord.
Yeah.
And of course Jack Grant, who did have those teeth and wasn't a ladies' man. I'm not even. I won't bother to pursue that any further.
Interestingly enough, and I know I say this often, interestingly enough, Jimmy Hill was married a few times, and had an eye for the ladies. So a man with that chin and beard was obviously sort of pretty attractive.
I think there was something about Jimmy.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
And also, once he's turned up on the telly, he's very much a voice of authority.
Yeah.
And he looks the part and he sounds like the part.
Yeah.
He's the boss, isn't he?
Yes, he is. And, we just heard the music there for London Weekend Television, part of the great ITV regions. But he leaves. He leaves in 1973, and he's going to the iconic show, and still an iconic show that was born sort of 9 years before, 1964 famously, and he becomes the face of Match of the Day.
And you might argue that, you know what, and guess what, we probably will argue because of the way that Jimmy Hill has conducted his business so far, he's probably the making of Match of the Day at
Totally
this
agree.
stage. Not least of which, of course, we end up with Des Lyman, of course, but we've had Gary Lineker of recent times, Bob Wilson prior.
Yeah.
Old pros.
Yeah, David
turning
Coleman
out as a
before
front,
that?
but David Coleman was this kind of a bit of everything guy.
Yes.
Whereas Jimmy Hill arrives at Match of the Day,
Football man.
and now we got a football man.
Yeah,
and now it's not just like a BBC sports guy. It feels like he's fronting a sports program.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely bang on with that. I mean, he was the face of Match of the Day. He was there from 73 to 1988, 600 plus appearances on Match of the Day. But here's an interesting fact: he worked for the Beeb doing a bit of punditry in 1966 when he was still at Cov. In the World Cup, and he covered every major tournament until 1998. So he was still on in the France tournament in 98 as a pundit.
Yes.
That's some career, isn't it?
It is that he kept it going all the way through there. And as I say, he's patently so smart. He was smart enough to take those jobs when he was still directly involved in football and then take that experience and start inventing these new roles for people.
Yes, yes. So his BBC career, we'll talk a little bit about that, was colourful.
Yeah.
At this point, he totally enamors himself with the country of Scotland. With one of his most famous moments of punditry, really. 1982 World Cup, I remember it so well. Scotland in the same group as a very fine Brazil team, the team of Zico and Eder and Socrates, hot favourites to win that World Cup, and they lose in a humdinger of a game to an Italian team that was had Rossi up front, who was rapier sharp. Brazil only had to draw. And when they got to 2-2, everybody's going, you only have to draw. They just couldn't help
didn't know how not to carry on.
Yeah. And Italy sort of like famously counter-attacked, and Rossi scored this sort of hat trick. But that Brazil team, still much loved, seen as the greatest team never to win the World Cup. They played Scotland in the group stages, poor Scotland in group stages. We all know the story of that. And Jimmy Hill's as one of the panel during half-time. And Scotland famously go 1-0 up. David Neary of Dundee United scores this astonishing goal.
It's a long range effort that looks, and you're a little bit surprised that it's come out of nowhere, isn't
Scotland, and Graham Souness famously says after, and Kenny, we made them angry. We were like, oh my God, what were we doing? But they go 1-0 up. Yeah, poked the bear, exactly. So they go 1-0 up against Brazil, and this goal, and half-time it cuts back, and Jimmy Hill, and this is available on YouTube, and Ali McCoy talks about this brilliantly when Jimmy passed away and they did the documentary, and Sir Alex Ferguson talks about it, and he describes it as a toe poke.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So this sends the fight.
I think that's scientifically impossible to a 25-yard screamer.
I won't back down on this. This is what Jimmy's clever at doing, and sends sort of the 5 million population of Scotland into sort of like,
naturally.
It just sends him insane. So he becomes the subject of a lot of quite derogatory, not very politically correct chants now. The fans constantly sang whenever he was there. And there's one famous game at Hampden where they're really giving him brickbats, and he is happy. He's in that glass box in Glasgow with like, what would Hampden's capacity be then? Like, it's like 250,000.
Right, exactly. That's right.
Unofficially.
With 80,000 paid.
Yeah. And, and he's in this box and he's getting pelts. And he just does this thing, Mark, which is what I think is fascinating about Jimmy Hill. It just seems to sort of fall off him. He almost enjoys it. It's almost a way of him going, I'm relevant, I will say things, and this is all part of the game. This is all part of entertainment, as you said.
I think that's been him since he was a kid, that we've talked about before. He's fireproof.
Yes.
He's so completely confident in himself. And clearly works with the adage, any publicity is good publicity.
Yeah.
Being recognised, being noticed is the prerogative.
Yeah.
Not necessarily to be respected or agreed with.
Yeah.
Just know I'm here.
Yes.
And that worked for him for his entire career.
Yeah. So in 1990, again, famously upsets the whole of Ireland this time.
Yes. He's moved on now. He's to another country.
Gone to another Celtic country. I mean, it really annoyed us in Wales because he never mentioned us. That was the worst.
How dare he not talk about you?
He was right in a way. There's nothing worse than being ignored.
You're telling your Celtic brothers. At least he's talking about you. He doesn't even know we're here.
Don't even know Wales. Anyway, he in 1990 in the Italy World Cup, he says that Ireland are there to make up the numbers.
Dear me.
I know, which really sort of endeared him to the Irish population of these isles. And again, refused to back down. And he does this thing where he goes, that's how it goes. And there's a story Alan Hansen tells when talking about it. He says, I once walked in front of the cop with him in the mid-'80s when he was absolutely, as we keep saying, one of the most famous men in the country.
Yes.
And he's getting brickbats. This is the mid-'80s. It's all terracing, swaying, and they're giving him everything. And he kind of turns to Nancy and goes, oh, this is how it goes in Liverpool. And almost like completely dismisses it as if to say, this is part of the game. And you just think, God, wouldn't he be a great lesson to people who sort of get upset now with social media of going, you just got to ride with it. This is what. So this is no different to sort of what we would call now being trolled. Jimmy being trolled goes, hey, this is the world I picked.
Yeah.
Get on with it. That's his attitude.
He's basically, because otherwise he's Wales.
Yeah.
He's ignored.
Yes.
And as you just pointed out, that's worse than being attacked.
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense about him. It makes so much sense about him as the man that he goes on to be. Because this is the thing for me, the Jimmy Hill that we're now getting.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because it was kind of always his way, or as he's getting older, he's becoming that kind of guy.
Yeah.
There's an element of self-importance about Jimmy Hill.
Yeah.
Believing his own publicity. Not a lot of humour.
Yeah.
There was not really a twinkle in his eye. The Jimmy Hill that I came to know in that later part of his career, sort of 80s Match of the Day onwards, was a rather earnest individual who enjoyed handing down his tablets of stone from the Mount.
Yeah, I mean, but he does that thing where he allows himself to be blown up. Have you seen it? The famous thing with Des Lynam, and he's all
with the wobbly head, yes.
Blackened. So he's obviously got a sense of
humour.
Because he was massively popular, wasn't he? That's the thing. Amongst the pundits.
It's
and
an
things.
interesting use of the word. I mean, successful, definitely.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I know we're entering this kind of territory which he ends up with when we talk about Sunday Supplement.
We'll talk about that, yeah. But what I'm trying to say, Mark, is, you've got a good point here. If he slated you as a player or whatever, then you are going to have a grudge. But off screen, he was obviously very popular to be working that long. You don't work for 30 years at top of the game. You can't.
No, totally.
So for people will find you out. It's just a fact. And when he died, all those people like Ali McCoist and Alan Hansen who worked with him said he was great fun to be around, interestingly enough. But as you say, he could come across as very earnest and patronising.
Well, do you know what? And of course, I'm stupid. We'll leave that statement there.
I disagree, Mark. I wouldn't be doing a podcast with you otherwise.
Thank God.
Although you do make me look good, so let's carry on.
That's really the point. Yes, right, yeah. I will be Wales in this part of the conversation.
You're going to love that forever.
It's really very good for me. I could eat out and drink out on that one for a long, long time. It's clear. The man knows he's an act. You spoke about Roy Keane earlier on. Roy Keane
knows he's an act now. Yes.
And by the time we got the Jimmy Hill we're getting now is a performance.
Yes.
Now it's born out, there's an element, his method.
Yeah.
There's a lot of him in there.
Yeah.
But fundamentally we're now getting a man who goes, I know what I'm meant to do to garner reaction in my role.
Clicks, we'd say now.
Totally.
Clicks.
Totally. But I also genuinely think as well, though, that he genuinely thinks that he's got the last word in football as well.
And do you know, but my doing the case for Jimmy Hill here,
Yeah.
you would think to yourself, I mean, let's just say, in 1976, right, he comes up with the idea for goal average, goal difference, right, the
Yes.
change. That's Jimmy Hill.
Yes.
Then in 81, he comes up with 3 points for a win rather than 2, just to make the games more exciting, because too many teams were, happy with a draw, and therefore, that's Jimmy Hill. So your ego is naturally going to be going, I do know a thing or two about football here.
Yeah.
You would think that, wouldn't you?
And again, you take 3 points for a win as being, well, of course it's 3 points for a win.
Yeah.
It wasn't always.
No.
And its effect was profound.
Yes.
2 points and 1 point aren't that different.
No.
Which means a draw, a dull 0-0,
Yeah.
it will do you.
A bit of the back pass to the goalkeeper, which seems obvious now.
Yeah.
At the time, that was a big, big thing. Oh, if you take that away, it could change the game. But it was massive.
So he's in a position of power
Yeah.
and a position of influence. He's basically been that way since grammar school.
Yes.
And through his national service.
Yeah.
And as a player and as a union rep and as a coach and as a manager and as an innovator in all the sport. The man's never been off, has he, through his entire life?
Exactly right. That's why we're talking about him now. We've spent
Yeah.
2 hours talking about the effect of Jimmy Hill.
Yeah.
Because all these... So, I often talk about football clubs, when they're owned by billionaires who are billionaire businessmen, blah, 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 and people go, they're pretty certain that they're right a lot of the time. Well, if you've become a billionaire, your judgment usually is pretty bang on.
Yeah.
It has to be. You're not somebody that's bless them, doing something else. So when they go into football, this is the problem. Because football defies all the laws, because it's a sport and your teams could lose, it really throws a lot of people. We've seen it at big football clubs, haven't we? Whereas Jimmy Hill is kind of like the opposite of that. He's somebody that's gone into football and been pretty much largely right almost till the end of his career.
The courage of his own conviction is something which... There's probably a million ways to make £1 million,
Yeah.
but each millionaire will have decided, I know the way and I'm going to
Yes.
stick to it. And that's how Jimmy Hill has conducted himself all the way through football.
Yeah.
There may be other options, but this is my option and this is the one you're going to get.
Yes. So what you've got this individual at this point who has this career where, he's literally gone from mountaintop to mountaintop to mountaintop.
Yes.
So he's not just climbed the top of one mountain. He's literally gone, right, I've climbed that mountain, I want the next one. A rare individual in human life, really.
Yeah.
Just topped the mountain in lots of different fields.
Completely.
So, I'd imagine that he was... he'd be pretty confident in what he's saying about the game.
I think we could say that.
And his influence on the game. He's got a pretty glittering CV when it comes to football. So then, in 1999, he leaves the BBC. There's a big fuss about it, a big fanfare. I remember it. It's like there's this shot of him, like saying where they've been blown up by there's all that kind of stuff. Because he's seen as the voice that he won't shut up. He's full of self-importance. He's full of opinion. Sky in '92 have got football, and they seem to be the new home of football is Sky, as the saying goes.
Well, again, you say that. Of course, at the time, I was going, why would you leave
Yes.
the comfort of the corporation to take a chance at satellite television? Will it even catch on?
Yeah.
It did.
It did. And he sets up the Jimmy Hill, which is where lots of sort of certainly our modern listeners or younger listeners would remember him in the Sunday supplement, which was massively popular. I don't think people understand that was hangover television on a Sunday.
I did not. I had to be watching
Ah, me?
4 Men with Newspapers.
Yes.
Otherwise, my day was lost.
I can't agree more. And I'm like, looking back, he's inventing podcasts there, which
Really?
is basically us
'cause
talking about football.
This is not visually striking. Nor are they.
No.
I mean, the only sound effect is the rustle of newspaper.
Yeah.
And then it's just talking or shouting or discussing with each other.
I can remember sort of like going, let me think. So it would have been 99. So I remember I was starting to do Soccer Sunday for HTV, as it was. We talked a lot about regional television, just becoming ITV Wales, the ITV, it becoming ITV sort of national at that point. And being in a sports meeting as a young researcher, and them going, we need to be more like the Sunday supplement.
Yeah.
People want that. And the same with radio stations, you had the phone-ins and all that kind of stuff. We need to be more where people can go on and talk, or get a journalist on to talk in depth about a very specific thing.
And I will guarantee you that prior to Jimmy Hill and the Sunday supplement, every TV producer in the land was saying, no one wants to watch
bunch
4
of
old
blokes.
men boring each other to death about football
Yeah.
as they throw the Sunday newspapers around.
Yeah.
And guess what?
That's what they want to do. Well, look, podcasting. We did podcasting a long time ago. We did the Whistleblowers together.
Yes.
But we remember being at the time going, let's make hay where the sun shines. We'll see what happens with this.
This fad's not going to catch on.
We'll go back to radio. I mean, podcasting defies physics, a bit like the Premier League.
Yeah.
Every time they say it just can't get any bigger, there can't be more money, it just goes through that cloud.
There he goes again.
And Jimmy Hill seemed to understand this, that he understood that football's trajectory was totally upwards. And this starts with him as a player for Fulham, but then certainly he joins the PFA, media, all his sort of influence on sort of like saying goal average and goal difference and 3 points and all this kind of stuff. He's just got this belief that football's just going to become bigger and bigger, and he wasn't wrong.
No, he wasn't, and at the start of it, he was brilliant.
Yeah.
It was because again, you had to respect his experience and his knowledge and his hands-on ability to be able to talk about the game in that kind of light. It changed a little bit as he got older because Brian Warnow come in alongside him to kind of take on the reins as the front man.
We do need to talk about this. I mean, in 2004, he didn't, certainly in the modern context, cover himself in glory.
No, it was actually appalling.
Yeah.
He was responding, of course, to
Ron
Atkinson's suspension ban and justified pillaring that he was getting for an appalling comment that he made.
Yeah.
Which Jimmy Hill sort of doubles down on, says that he shouldn't be picked on for that, and in fact, and then goes on to use the word several times in his defence of him, and says it's pretty much like the same as people calling me Chinny.
Yes.
Which car brakes, and time almost freezes.
Well, he's just got to that point, Mark, hasn't he, where all his life he's absolutely skirted that controversy, and known, and here he gets it. He gets it grossly wrong. This is the moment where it's just gone. You don't get it. You don't understand it anymore.
I've said something. I've said 1,000 things, and no one's really had a problem with it. This is just the 1,001st thing, but it wasn't.
Yeah,
it was completely and utterly wrong from nowhere. I don't know. Do we say the old cliche is just he's getting on a bit at this stage and, he's a man out of his time? I don't even know if I can defend it with that.
No,
because he's an intellectual and he should have the common sense to know that the words that were going to come out of his mouth in defence of Ron Atkinson were going to make the situation worse and not better.
Yeah, I mean, to use the expression and the name of this podcast, the past's a different country. They do things differently there. We get that. It is a long way from the young man who wrote the letter in the Times or put his name to the Times against apartheid in sport.
Completely.
It's a long way to that. And there's a myriad of reasons. I mean, he does end up, bless him, with dementia, serious dementia. So there's signs that, physically and mentally that he's breaking down. Yeah. And it became more obvious really at the last Sunday. And the Sunday supplements I want. It was a shame.
It's a shame, and it's not. It's not a swan song that that the rest of his life deserved or had earned.
No.
But it's there.
It's there, and it's something we have to talk about, that he absolutely got that, categorically wrong. Saying that, I mean, his influence on the game, we've just spoken about it for, I don't need 2 hours, is huge. And, we need to sort of touch on other things that he did just to finish it all off, because it was very sad that he died, the way he did, and there was all sorts of problems with his sort of his third wife and his children with his second wife. So, it's a fascinating life that he lived, Jimmy Hill. Totally. There's no two ways about it. But there's all these little things that pop up as well, Mark, which I thought just a nice way to end it. He was the chairman of Charlton Athletic.
Yeah, that one snuck under the radar somewhat, didn't it?
And in 87, he was the chairman of Fulham for a bit. There was other controversies as well. He's not a popular man in Sunderland, as we know. Did this famous game where Coventry City, this is when he was chairman, and he was managing director of Coventry for a while as well. He did lots of things at Coventry. He was the chairman in the last match in 2005. And they sing the Sky Blue song and all that. But there's a game that he held up for 15 minutes where Coventry play Bristol City, and they waited on the Sunderland result. And they played out if you see the footage, a very lukewarm match where both, stayed up by the point each. It's basically now you'd go, it was cheating. Yeah, it was cheating.
It's on the verge.
Yeah, let's
pushing the envelope there.
Let's not, beat about the They played out a 2-2 draw. So this happened as well. So he wasn't a man he also ended up as president of the Corinthian Casuals.
Yes,
of course he did.
One of the great amateur teams. Still don't get paid.
Yeah. And, he's coming back to something, he wrote the words of good old Arsenal. So there's a song about Arsenal that fans still sing and all that. So it was an extraordinary life. And, this is why we have to talk about all these aspects of it, where his effect on the game of football is almost immeasurable.
Well, the only way you can really finish that, was he Mr. Modern Football? Was he?
I don't know. You can get us. You can get us on every channel.
You really can't. You can't chinny like I can chinny.
I can't. Yeah, I haven't got the beard for it.
You haven't put the hard yards in.
The Ho
mate.
Chi Minh beard, as they call it. Yeah. You can get us on all the usual platforms. Share us. Make sure you. Can you download us? Is that the one?
I would.
Jimmy Hill, ladies and gentlemen.